Socialism and property. How does socialism treat property? And it may best be restated as socialism versus property. Karl Marx, in his books, said no private property. In fact, he listed 10 things that needed to be done to create a perfect society, and the first one was no private property, period. He re-emphasized it as though, well, if you didn't believe me the first time, here's the second time. So there's this adversarial thing. Marx looked at it as the bourgeoisie, which were the newly evolving business owners, versus the proletariat. There was, if you could just create this schism, we could break up all the bad guys and the workers of the world would take over, which didn't exactly, wasn't the way it happened. But, you know, property is, in essence, the thing that they don't want, right? And China here is a spectacular example of property and how it works in an economy, even a communist economy. So understand the Chinese Constitution early on, no private property. Same with the Soviet Union, Cuba, North Korea, Vietnam, host of countries, both socialist and communist. Although Karl Marx will tell you they're both the same thing, the principles of socialism are the same as the principles of communism. It's just how far you take it, right? And communism actually turned into a political party for most of these states, so I don't know what that means exactly, but once you turn something into any kind of institution, it suddenly desires more power, and that's not been good for any of these nations. So what do we have? We have the schism, and we have China, and so when Mao died in the 70s, Deng Xiaoping took over. Now, Deng Xiaoping was a pretty smart cookie. He was, I don't know if he came to the West to educate, but he understood Western ideas about economics. One of his early statements was, we need millions of pathfinders to create new ideas. Well, you know, under Mao was the only guy who had an idea. Nobody else could. Now, to execute on that statement, Deng ushered in changes to the Constitution that would allow for private property, albeit subordinate to the state, heavily subordinate to the state, but it allowed people the freedom to take their ideas, and if there were some capital around, maybe their own sweat equity, they could create businesses, and that's what happened. That, along with some other things that happened after they changed the Constitution, like creating a banking system, like opening up trade, like getting into the World Trade Organization, because of all the liberalizations in their economy. And guess what happened? China was literally one of the poorest nations in the world, although it had tons of people and its GDP, you know, registered high on the list instead of low. You know, sheer numbers make a difference, but they're poor. People were living on less than $3 a day, and much of this society, maybe 60 or 70% of the society, that changed. Literally, with the development of the manufacturing arena and all kinds of other places in the economy, they have grown to the second largest economy. Their people now earn probably at least 50 times what they earned in the 80s. I mean, it's a phenomenal success story with one change, right? One change. So, but that, you know, kind of schism between business and politics, or business and government, especially in communist and socialist nations, has arrived at our doorstep, especially this century, where I think on the left, the motto might be just regulate it, right? When there's a problem, you know, no matter what it is, and however big or small, regulators flow in, you know, we're gonna fix this guy, but then supposedly everybody else that might be playing by the fair game, right? And all of a sudden you have this heavy regulatory environment, conscripted by the government, controlled by the government. So many industries are literally have so much control, they really don't operate freely or compete freely. So on the socialist end, you are planning against the competition, and on the other side, it's planning for the competition. So what does that net out? The weight of government with more and more regulations, which, by the way, cost about the American economy about $2 trillion a year, with ever rising taxes, and all of a sudden, you and I begin to get hurt, right? Our higher taxes are problematic. If we try to open a business and scale it, we may run into the government. We will run into the government one way or the other. And it just becomes weighty, and for a couple of reasons. The size of government is a problem, always. If it gets too big, it's just too big of a weight. But if it's ineffective, whether it's programs or it's regulations, it becomes a second burden. And if we start borrowing money, there's a third burden. They just keep going and going, right? So we really, when you look at the socialist, idea of what do we need to do, first it's antagonistic to property, but second of all, it's this increasing burden that's ineffective. And that's not a good thing. So how you treat property, if you have an adversarial approach, you're going to have an adversarial approach to the economy. So if you're voting on that side of the house, for whatever reason, out of anger or out of sheer love for Canada or whatever, you may be voting against yourself because you're voting against the thing that even made the Chinese economy, a communist one albeit, successful. Anyway, I'm Tom Llewellyn. I'll see you next week talking about capitalism and property. Or is it versus? Talk to you soon.